Thank you very much, everybody, for attending this meeting today. This is the first virtual meeting of the SABR Quebec chapter this year. We had a in-person meeting at the stadium at Trois-Rivières, where I attended the baseball game in August. So let me tell you something about our friend Robert Elias here, because he came to Montreal in 2018. He was a visiting professor at McGill. And I can't say that we helped him a lot, but I think we we got some input in your with your classes.
You
We
did.
attended at least your last presentation at least. So and you attended one of our meetings, in-person meetings that was before the pandemic, of course.
Yes.
So that's how we got to know you, and I think I would like to consider you as a friend of the chapter.
Thank you.
And which is why
am.
when you contacted me a while back, about the book about Danny Gardella, and knowing that Danny Gardella played in Drummondville with the Quebec Provincial League in 1949, with major leaguers, among others, I think Max Lanier, Sal Magley, Vic Power. So you piqued our interest, Rob. So you published a book. Is it going well?
Yes. Yeah.
Good.
I think so. I've been giving a lot of talks about it. So it's mostly
Fantastic.
Zoom. That's the way things are done these days.
Exactly. We wanted to have you back in Montreal for your talk, but Zoom will be enough for today,
Yes.
So listen, just before I let you start, we're gonna have another meeting next November. I'll be the star. I'm gonna be talking about Taylor Smith, who was a black baseball player, played in Montreal and in Saint-Jean in Quebec. Uh, Played for a couple of seasons. Was probably one of the first black players to come from the U.S. to Quebec, to play. So that's going to be really interesting. I wrote an article for the Journal of Canadian Baseball a couple of years ago about him, and we'll be following his career, and also his travels to Quebec City. That's going to be really interesting. So without further ado, I'll let you talk, Rob. You got the floor.
Okay, so I have a PowerPoint. So could you make me co-host, and then I can
Yes,
see if I
sir.
can get this up here.
Yes, sir. Make host. There you go. Confirm. There you go.
Okay, so do you see
The book.
just the book, right?
Yep.
Okay, so let me get set up here. Okay, I think I'm ready. I have about 30 minutes, and then maybe we can open it up for questions and comments. So thank you, Patrick, for the introduction and for your invitation to address the SABR Quebec chapter. As you were indicating, I'm very glad to be connecting with Quebec again, even remotely. Had a very rewarding time when I was in Montreal, teaching at McGill and meeting with some of you folks back in 2018. I was looking at that time at what I thought was the underestimated history of baseball in Canada in the shadow of hockey. Um, in any case, right now, I'm happy to see Canada back in the World Series. I think that's great. They had a great win last night. The Blue Jays had a great win last night. So we'll see what happens there. So today I have a story about a New York Giant, Danny Gardella. I've written a book about him, who I believe had a neglected impact on Major League Baseball and also a crucial role in winning a Quebec Provincial League championship in the late 1940s. So I'd like to talk about both of those things. Sports writers condemned and red-baited him. Brooklyn Dodgers owner Branch Rickey called him a communist. A Florida congressman said that he would be the death knell for the sport that has kindled the fires of ambition in thousands of young Americans. The target of these and many other attacks was Danny Gardella, who had the nerve to seek fair pay for his labors as a ball player. In response, he protested, "I was no communist for exercising my American rights." I have a story to tell about a baseball player, but it's also a bigger story about Major League sports in the US and about post-World War II America, especially its labor battles, its anti-communist hysteria, and its challenges to the American dream. In baseball, besides the exploits of ball players on the field, we also tend to identify individuals who change the game, or who stand out because of their antics or their personalities. We recognize as pioneers, for example, players such as Babe Ruth, Jackie Robinson, Jim Bouton, and Curt Flood. And we also recognize characters or eccentrics such as Dizzy Dean, Casey Stengel, Yogi Berra, and Bill Spaceman Lee. But one neglected baseball pioneer and eccentric was former New York Giants ball player Danny Gardella, yet almost nobody's ever heard of him. In particular, millionaire athletes, not only in baseball, but in all major league sports, owe him a million thanks. But they have no idea who he was, even though he was a phenomenon in his own time in the late 1940s. Consider, for example, his nicknames. Nicknames for ball players who've had a long history in baseball. If you were anyone at all in baseball, you had to have been given a nickname, but only occasionally would you have more than one. Danny, however, was given more than 36 nicknames, which suggests the exceptional kind of character he was. What if you discovered a Zelig-like figure who showed up where you'd least expect it, who was a ball player who played professionally in the US, Mexico, Cuba, and Canada, who was also an accomplished acrobat, gymnast, and Golden Gloves boxer, who was also a fitness, nutrition, and weight training pioneer, who was also a gifted opera, Broadway, and vaudeville singer who posed as a model and once studied to be an actor, who was also a notorious prankster and comedian, who, despite being a high school dropout, was also a self-taught poet, philosopher, and psychologist. And what if you discovered that this same ball player established a landmark precedent for challenging antitrust violations, who also forced Major League Baseball to stop rating players from the Mexican and other foreign leagues, who also helped break Major League Baseball's color line, who also inspired the creation of the American Baseball Guild Labor Union for players' rights, who also won the first successful federal court challenge to the slavery and suppressed wages of baseball's reserve clause, paving the way for free agency, who was also repeatedly regarded by major league owners as dangerous. If you discovered all these things, as I did about Danny Gardella, then you would do as I did and write the biography of his life and times in post-war America. I first ran across Gardella when writing my earlier book, The Empire Strikes Out, A History of Baseball's Relationship with U.S. Foreign and Military Policy. As Major League Baseball has projected itself and the American empire into foreign lands, Danny showed up in one of the many U.S. interventions, this time into Mexico. More recently, Peter Dreyer and I wrote 2 books, Major League Rebels and Baseball Rebels, and Danny emerged again, this time challenging Major League Baseball's wage slavery in the 1940s. Gardella seemed important, yet little had been written about him. And why would the baseball owners regard him as dangerous? When I discovered that he was also a notorious character and a bit of a Renaissance man, I was convinced to write his story. I was also intrigued because the heart of Gardella's story occurred at a time that's long fascinated me, the post-World War II period. The U.S. was fresh off its triumph in the so-called Good War, which left America on top of the world, with the strongest economy and with a positive, even grateful reputation. The U.S. seemingly had everything going for it, providing the opportunity to finish America's progressive New Deal initiatives. We could champion peace rather than war, international law rather than empire, an economy for the many rather than the few, and justice rather than exploitation for workers, minorities, and women. Since essentially we did none of those things, I always wanted to know more about why. I was particularly struck by the labor wars of this period and then the nation's consumption by an anti-communist Red Scare hysteria. How could an era that held so much promise end up ruining so many lives? Given the ruined lives portrayed, for example, in the 1946 blockbuster film The Best Years of Our Lives, the title seemed more like an ironic or satirical portrayal of the post-war era. Why did the nation seem to be making so many decisions away from progress, peace, and justice, rather than embracing them when it had the best chance in its history to accomplish those ends? I wondered how I could explore this period from a new perspective through the lens of baseball and Danny Gardella. It also happened that my mother and father were New York City contemporaries of Gardella, from the Bronx and Queens, respectively, and thus exploring Danny's life gave me insights into the lives of my own parents. Danny Gardella grew up in Little Italy in the Bronx, New York, in the 1920s and 1930s, playing sandlot ball with his brother Al. They were inspired by fellow Italians in the major leagues, especially Tony Lazzeri and Joe DiMaggio. The teenage Gardella was signed, along with his brother, into the Detroit Tigers minor league system. Despite his short stature, he was only 5'7" and 160 pounds. Gardella was powerfully built and always a threat to hit the long ball. But from 1938 to 1940, Danny was shuttled from one minor league town to another, traded into the Cleveland Indians organization, and then became the property of the Washington Senators. And property is a key word here. Pessimistic about his career, Danny quit organized baseball for a series of blue-collar jobs for the next few years. Playing in a shipyard industrial league, however, Gardella was spotted by a New York Giants scout and signed to its top farm team in Jersey City in 1944. Quickly developing a reputation for his idiosyncrasies, he also excelled on the field, and the Giants promoted him to the Major League club for a meager $1,500 salary. He became an immediate sensation with his hitting, if not his fielding. When he cooled off, he returned to Jersey City to end the 1944 season. With another impressive start in Jersey City in 1945, however, Giants player-manager Mel Ott, shown on the left here, brought Gardella back up to the Giants early in the season, and he never left. Danny hammered the ball all year, was elevated to batting cleanup, won ball games with late-inning home runs, and replaced Hall of Famers Joe Medwick and then Ott himself in the outfield, thus earning a pay increase to $4,000. Danny became a fan favorite, inspiring the Gardella Garden rooting section in the outfield bleachers, the Danny Gardella fan club, and the first ever fan banners at the Polo Grounds flown on his behalf. Ending the season as a Giants leader in hits and RBIs, he was also one of the National League leaders in home runs. Despite his brief time in the majors, Gardella was already known for his antics and eccentricities. Fielding balls hit to him in the outfield was sometimes an adventure for Danny, although unfairly exaggerated by sports writers. A bodybuilder, when baseball frowned upon weight training, he was also a vegetarian among steak eaters, and some people believe he invented the smoothie. He'd walk on his hands in the outfield, perform one-armed handstands on his bedpost or the dugout roof, and hypnotize his teammates for better performance. On team train rides, he'd quote Freudian psychology or Shakespeare's Macbeth, or poetry such as Thomas Gray's Elegy or Edgar Allan Poe's Annabel Lee. In the dugout, on the team bus, and almost anywhere, he'd sing opera, such as Puccini's Tosca or Verdi's Aida, and ballads and show tunes such as Danny Boy, The King of Broken Hearts, and All the Things You Are. He'd catch balls dropped from Navy blimps and hang from train trestles and the window ledges of skyscrapers. But Danny had also been a star during the 1945 season and expected a significant raise. Instead, the Giants offered him only $500 more for his 1946 contract. When he protested, the Giants banned him from the team hotel and field during spring training. With Gardella bound by the reserve clause, they knew Danny had no choice. When Gardella still resisted, Giants owner Horace Stoneham announced he would sell Danny back into the minor leagues. So, what is the reserve clause? As some of you likely know, since the early days of professional baseball in the late 1800s, a reserve clause appeared in every ball player's contract. When you signed your contract, you were bound to one team for that season and also reserved to play for that same team the next season as long as it kept renewing your contract. And although the ball player was bound as property, the team could release him with only 10 days' notice and cancel the contract. In effect, the ball player became enslaved to the team that first signed him, or to whichever team he was either traded or sold. If he was sold, the ball player received none of the purchase price for his value. Since the reserve prevented the ball player from offering his services to other teams to the highest bidder, for a better salary, this suppressed his wages for nearly 100 years. Except for a few stars, ball player salaries were kept low. Owners kept getting rich, paying low wages because they knew ball players had no other place to go if they wanted to play Major League Baseball. As a group, the Major League Baseball teams formed a monopoly, potentially regulated by America's antitrust laws. To promote competition, those laws forbid collusion among companies. Yet all MLB teams were colluding with each other to impose a common contract, including the reserve clause, so that players could not try to sell themselves to other teams. Although antitrust laws had been around since 1890, they were not well enforced, thanks largely to Supreme Court decisions that manufactured loopholes for monopolies well into the 1930s. And in 1922, the court had specifically ruled that Major League Baseball wouldn't be subject to antitrust laws. And the 1920s are where the reserve clause and antitrust story has typically ended until it's picked up again 4 decades later in the late 1960s and early 1970s, when the saga of Curt Flood and Marvin Miller emerges, finally leading to free agency in baseball and then in other sports in the late 1970s. And of course, ball players have enjoyed considerable riches ever since, now freed to periodically sell their skills to the highest bidder. The highest earner, the LA Dodgers' Shohei Ohtani, will make $70 million in 2025. The average salary is $5 million. The median player salary is $1.3 million, and $760,000 is the minimum salary. But that gap between the 1920s and the 1970s misses an essential ingredient in the free agency evolution. It's the missing story of Danny Gardella in the late 1940s and his neglected role in providing the first and ultimately a lasting challenge to the major league owners and their repressive contracts. Before free agency, since ball players couldn't sell their services to the highest bidder among the teams in the existing major leagues, the only way they could possibly escape the reserve was if another major league became available. The existing major league always fought fiercely to try to prevent this from happening. But it did occur a few times when the National League was challenged in 1882 by the American Association, in 1890 by the Players League, and in 1901 by the American League. And the combined National and American Leagues were challenged again in 1914 by the Federal League. But in each case, players escaped the reserve clause for only a year or two when it was reimposed and their salaries and mobility were slashed once again. This was the situation ball players faced in the late 1940s when owners were making big profits while suppressed player wages remained lower than before the war. The ball clubs remained vigilant against any legal challenges to the reserve clause or any competing leagues. But they weren't counting on Danny Gardella and the Mexican League in 1946. Prior to that season, working as a trainer and masseuse at Al Roon's, an upscale New York gym, Gardella met Jorge Pascal, a wealthy team owner in the Mexican League, which he was essentially running. Pascal knew about Danny's strong 1945 season, couldn't believe how little the Giants were paying him, and told Danny he'd pay him a lot more to play for his team. Pascal had already bolstered the Mexican League by luring dozens of Negro League black players who were still banned from the U.S. major leagues. A multimillionaire, Pascal now had his eye on white major leaguers to further transform his Mexican league into a major league. When Danny was shunned by the Giants for protesting his insulting pay raise, Gardella remembered Pascal's offer. Instead of allowing the Giants to profit from selling him to a minor league team, Danny jumped to the Mexican League to play for the Veracruz Blues for more than twice his major league salary. But he didn't jump alone. Instead, Gardella led a movement to lure other underpaid major leaguers to join him, including some stars. With the help of Pascal's big salary offers, Gardella helped recruit more than 25 other white major leaguers to the Mexican League, launching Major League Baseball's biggest nightmare: the ability of players to escape the reserve clause and get better salaries because another major league had emerged for them to play in. Here are some of the other jumpers, some of whom you may recognize: Vern Stevens, Max Lanier, Mickey Owen, Fred Martin, Red Hayworth. And then the bottom row is Lou Klein, Alex Carrasquel, Bobby Estalella, and Mo Franklin. But with owner Horace Stoneham having a reputation for paying the worst salaries, the Giants had the most jumpers. Joining Danny was Sal Maglie, Nap Reyes, George Houseman, Roy Zimmerman, Adrian Zabala, Harry Feldman, and Ace Adams. As you all know, Montreal and Quebec played a crucial role in breaking the color barrier in Major League Baseball in the 20th century. After his signing, Jackie Robinson was sent to play the 1946 season in the minors for the Montreal Royals of the International League because Branch Rickey felt Jackie would encounter less racism from white players and fans in Canada. Robinson was not only accepted in Montreal, he became a hero. In his 1948 book, My Own Story, Robinson wrote, quote, "As my plane roared skyward and the lights of Montreal twinkled in the distance, I took one last look at this great city where I had found so much happiness. I don't care if I ever get to the majors. This is the city for me. This is paradise," close quote. His positive reception in Montreal paved the way for his elevation in 1947 to the Brooklyn Dodgers, breaking the Major League color ban for the first time in more than 60 years. But Danny Gardella's jump to the Mexican League also helped break the color barrier in baseball. The white players he inspired to follow him in 1946 were now playing agreeably, not only against black players from both the U.S. and other nations on Mexican teams, but also playing with and sometimes even being managed by blacks. It made it harder for Major League team owners to claim it could never be done in the U.S., and helped baseball commissioner Albert Chandler to allow Jackie Robinson's integration initiative to proceed in 1947. Here are some of the black Negro League players Gardella and the other white jumpers played with and against. So you can see Ray Dandridge, Theodore Smith, Ted Radcliffe, Martin Dihigo on the top, and then the bottom row, Booker McDaniel, Bernice Wright, Terrence McDuffie, and Ray Brown. A couple of these folks made it into the Cooperstown Hall of Fame. In response to their defections, MLB blacklisted Gardella and the other jumpers to punish them and deter others from following, since the Mexican League, free from the reserve clause, was threatening MLB's low-wage business model and tempting big-name players such as Ted Williams, Stan Musial, and Bob Feller. The 5-year ban essentially meant ending players' major league careers if they tried to return. It also blacklisted them from the minor leagues and even from semi-pro baseball. When Danny returned to the U.S., he was deprived of his ability to earn a living playing baseball and singled out as a pariah. After Mexico, Gardella played 2 winters in Cuba, where he was the home run champ in his second season. He resorted to barnstorming around the U.S. with other jumpers to try to make a little money. Danny was among Max Lanier's All-Stars, who went undefeated in 80 games in 1948. Then in 1949, with his lawsuit still pending, Danny signed with the Drummondville Cubs in the Quebec Provincial League. Operating independently from Major League Baseball, it also escaped MLB's designation as an outlaw league, since unlike the Mexican League, the QPL wasn't poaching major leaguers with exorbitant salaries. Gardella was joined on the Cubs by fellow jumpers Sal Maglie, Max Lanier, and Roy Zimmerman. The team also included Negro leaguer Quincy Troop, former Major Leaguer Tex Shirley, future Major Leaguers Vic Power and Roberto Vargas, and Canadian and former Mexican leaguer Stan Braillard. Other jumpers, Lou Klein, Alex Carrasquel, and Red Hayworth, joined the QPL's St. Jean Braves, and Fred Martin, Adrian Zabala, Harry Feldman, and the Canadian Roland Gladue joined the QPL's Sherbrooke Athletics. Attempting to short-circuit Gardella's antitrust lawsuit, Commissioner Chandler decided to reduce the jumper ban from 5 to 3 years on June 5, 1949, giving all the jumpers 30 days to seek a new contract from their former MLB clubs. Here we see Lanier, Maglie, and Gardella reading the news of the reinstatement. With the reserve clause still in force, however, it allowed players to negotiate only with their former MLB team, which retained full control of player salaries. It took 3 weeks before some jumpers finally relented, beginning with Lou Klein. He was signed by the St. Louis Cardinals, with Max Lanier and Fred Martin soon joining him there. Alex Carrasquel signed with the Chicago White Sox, Adrian Zabala with the New York Giants, and Harry Feldman with the San Francisco Seals in the Pacific Coast League. Grateful for the opportunity the QPL had given them, Maglie and Zimmerman both finished the season with Drummondville. Determined to wait out his lawsuit against MLB's reserve clause and loving his Canadian experience, Gardella remained as well. Danny was a fan favorite. He ran one of his home runs backwards around the bases, finished off another one with a flip onto home plate, and walked on his hands to his outfield position while breaking out in song. When Maglie invited Danny home for a steak dinner one evening, Gardella never showed. Sal was angry until he learned that on his way to the Maglies, Danny had run into the Cubs' official scorer, who was also an undertaker and who was rushing to an accident. Needing assistance, Danny helped him retrieve the body and then helped the undertaker embalm him. Besides his antics, Gardella was hitting up a storm. In the July 7th game against St. Hyacinth, he hit 3 home runs, including a grand slam, driving in 8 runs. A QPL All-Star, his sensational catch in the 13th inning saved the game for the North All-Stars. On August 25th, he hit a 10th inning walk-off home run to beat St. Jean. Gardella helped lead the Cubs to a first-place 63-34 finish. Overall, he batted .283 with 17 home runs and 80 RBIs. In the QPL playoffs, Danny's single and home run won Game 1 for Drummondville against St. Hyacinth, and his Game 2 hit helped the Cubs win the next day as well. With the series tied 4-4, Maglie held St. Hyacinth to 1 run, and Danny's double, home run, and 5 RBIs won the deciding game 7-1. In the QPL finals, Gardella and Maglie were heroes again, with Danny hitting a grand slam and Sal shutting out the Farnham Pirates 7-0 in the opener. Then, with the teams again tied 4 games apiece and Farnham leading 1-0 in the 7th inning of the final game, Danny broke through with a hit and a run, triggering a 4-run rally, with Maglie shutting down the Pirates the rest of the way. This brought Drummondville its only QPL championship. The press lauded the heroics of Danny and Sal, and they both spoke gratefully at the town's championship banquet. And as reporter Bill Young wrote, quote, Gardella would be forever remembered for the time in 1949 as a Drummondville Cub when he stood up to the captains of industry and rattled them to their very core, close quote. Which brings us back to Gardella's role in the free agency story. Beginning in 1945, despite the cheery assumptions about America's post-war economy, prosperity for American workers was fleeting. Corporate America began a war on labor. The U.S. had rejected full employment, FDR's Economic Bill of Rights, and other initiatives for economic democracy. Conservatives and corporate lobbyists secured a series of anti-union right-to-work laws from state legislatures. The post-war Republican Congress passed the repressive Taft-Hartley Act in 1947, targeting unions, imposing loyalty oaths, and persecuting labor activists who were red-baited in the emerging Cold War Red Scare. American workers were on the defensive, struggling to protect their progress toward a decent standard of living. Wars between labor and capital dominated the post-war era, with workers launching hundreds of strikes in 1945 and 1946 alone. Just as Kurt Flood would later claim that he was influenced by the 1960s social movements, Danny was influenced by the enormous labor activism of the late 1940s. His rebellion helped inspire the creation of the American Baseball Guild, a new attempt to organize players into a labor union. And he sued Major League Baseball. For challenging the reserve clause and MLB's antitrust exemption, he was condemned and red-baited for allegedly trying to destroy baseball in America. After a long battle, the Gardella versus Chandler legal case finally reached the Federal Appeals Court for the Second Circuit in 1949. Confident the court would reaffirm the 1922 Supreme Court decision that granted organized baseball an antitrust exemption, the owners were shocked when instead the reserve clause was condemned. The rebuke came not from just any judges, but instead from two of the most esteemed appellate court judges in American history, Jerome Frank on the left here and Leonard Hand. Frank claimed that, quote, "We have here a monopoly which, in its effect on ball players, possesses characteristics shockingly repugnant to moral principles that, at least since the war between the states, have been basic in America, as shown by the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, condemning involuntary servitude. The reserve clause results in something resembling the peonage of the baseball player." As a result, Gardella was granted a new trial with the weight of these two jurists hanging over the outcome. Fearing a loss, the owners offered a financial settlement that Gardella sought to refuse, but ultimately could not, given his impoverished circumstances and the likelihood that he'd remain blackballed in professional baseball. Sure enough, after being restored briefly to the majors for one at-bat with the St. Louis Cardinals in 1950, he was quickly dropped and blacklisted again. Out of organized Major League Baseball once again, Gardella sought one last hurrah as a professional ball player. He joined his brother Al Gardella, who had become the manager of the Trois-Rivières Royals, excuse my French. Danny was back in the Provincial League in 1951 and welcomed fondly by the Quebec press and fans. Sadly, the Royals fared poorly, and risking the wrath of his brother, Danny began hypnotizing his fellow ball players to improve their performance. The brothers survived the rift, but Al was soon gone as manager, and Danny lasted only an additional month, convinced that his baseball skills were finally exhausted. But Gardella's judicial decision, the only federal court rejection of the reserve clause, lived on. During the 1950s on into the 1960s, it inspired multiple lawsuits against MLB by subsequent baseball players, beginning with minor leaguers, and also court cases challenging the reserve clause and other legal abuses in the National Football League, the National Hockey League, and the boxing, horse racing, and even the dog show industries. The so-called Gardella effect also inspired grand jury challenges and two congressional investigations into the baseball industry. Every single legal challenge to MLB's reserve clause and antitrust exemption was based on Gardella's precedent. In the mid-1960s, major leaguers, not just minor leaguers, as a group, finally began to push back against their reserve clause oppression. Under Marvin Miller's guidance, the Major League Baseball's Player Association began to emerge as a real labor union, getting owner concessions by threatening another, quote, Gardella lawsuit. Then in 1969, Curt Flood refused to be traded from the St. Louis Cardinals. And the more familiar story unfolded. Flood sued MLB to challenge the reserve clause and the antitrust exemption. But less known is that, once again, the Gardella court decision played a central role, with Flood's legal brief quoting Jerome Frank's condemnation of baseball's peonage system. Although Flood ultimately lost his 1972 Supreme Court case, it finally raised the consciousness of the ball players and inspired them to defeat the reserve clause by other means in 1975. That year, baseball players and soon major leaguers in all sports were granted free agency, which began their rise into untold riches. And the owners got richer too. Danny, of course, enjoyed none of those riches. Gardella's vaudeville and Broadway singing career in the US and Canada was promising but fairly short-lived, and he spent most of the rest of his life toiling at a series of blue-collar jobs, almost completely forgotten. He died in 2005 at the age of 85. Despite his many challenges, Gardella nevertheless made his mark playing baseball in the US, Mexico, and Cuba, not to mention his heroics in Canada. And while Danny wasn't in the room where and when it happened, his rebellion sacrificed his career and began the process of freeing ball players from their shackles and suppressed incomes. The Major League Baseball Players Association became America's most successful labor union. Millionaire ball players owe Danny Gardella a million thanks, yet none of them know who he was or what an entertaining character he turned out to be, or what he helped accomplish on their behalf. A neglected pioneer, hopefully that can begin to change on this, the 50th anniversary of free agency. Of course, there's much more to say about Gardella's life and times, but I think I'll stop there for questions and comments. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Rob. It was very interesting. Got any questions, folks, for Robert? Philip?
Robert, can you tell us a bit more? What was the lawsuit exactly that ended up in appellate court? Was Gardella suing the National League, or was he being sued?
No, he was suing the National League. He was arguing that the ban prevented him from earning a living, and that the ban occurred as a result of him challenging something that was illegal, that he felt was illegal, that the reserve clause in the contracts was a violation of contract law, and that the major leagues were a monopoly, and that they ought to be covered by the antitrust laws in the U.S., and those antitrust laws forbid collusion among the teams. And the collusion here would be that all of those teams together agree on a common contract. So they are rigging the system so that none of the players could try to sell their services to the highest bidder, to another team, in other words. And so in the absence of that, it suppressed wages. So he was attacking that whole sort of legal framework around that business model, the business model, yeah. So no, he was suing.
Yeah, I have a question. Robert, really interesting, really good. Thank you for that presentation. It's odd you're saying, players today don't know who Danny Gardella is. I think I'm gonna give them a pass for that. I wrote a book about the Jackie Robinson playing with the Royals in '46.
Yes.
So I kind of dabbled a little bit into this whole Mexican story, the jumpers who went for, and I had never heard that name before. It was barely ever mentioned, like even reading the press, sorry, of those days. He seemed like a forgotten element of this whole story, even as it happened. But my question, so if I understand correctly, he played 1 year in Mexico, is that it?
Yes, he only played 1 year. There were a couple of the jumpers who played longer, played for 2 or 3 years. What happened in Mexico is that although Jorge Pascal had a lot of money and he put a lot of money in, and things were going quite well for, I would say, about half the season. Big crowds were turning out. It turned out that Pascal didn't think he could sustain it at that level very much longer. So it began to turn off some of the jumpers, and so they decided to look for other opportunities. Although again, a few of them did stay and continue to play. Actually, Sal Magli stayed a second year. He was a 20-game winner for both the years that he was in Mexico. And then he won 20 games for Drummondville when he came up to Canada. So he was showing a lot of success and was, really sought after in coming back to the major leagues because he had a whole career in front of him, and it was a good career.
Well, that was exactly the question I was going to ask. I didn't really study that aspect of it, but it really seemed to unravel quite quickly in Mexico after the first burst of money that was given to all those players. And yeah, as you mentioned, the Pascals tried to get Stan Musial. From what the numbers that were reported at that point, he was offered $50,000. He made 11,000 with the cards, but he still stayed. But after that first influx of money, there didn't seem to be much to back off that initial push that they made. Yeah.
Yes, I think that's right. I think he was counting on getting at least one or two really, really big stars. There were some minor stars. Vern Stevens had won the American League Home Run Championship the previous year. He was a star. And Max Lanier was a great pitcher. But he wanted really big name people, and they came close. Apparently, Musial really was tempted. Phil Rizzuto almost signed. His wife talked him out of it. And other, if he could have gotten Bob Feller or Ted Williams, some of these other big players, that would have made a big difference. But that didn't happen, and so it just didn't pan out the way he was hoping it would, despite the fact that he had a lot of money to spend. So it was helpful in of course, breaking through, Major League's reserve clause, at least in the long run, but it didn't sustain. The only thing it did for the Mexican League is that it gave the Mexican League a special status. Commissioner Chandler knew he was dealing with something pretty serious here, and ultimately, even though it stopped rating players, it was given a special status in the whole overall apparatus of organized baseball. So it did get that out of it. Pascal also died a few years later in a plane crash, so
yeah.
He didn't live much longer than this.
Yeah, well, I can understand why Stan Musial would think about if he multiplied his salary by 5, if those numbers were correct. I can understand why you'd consider it. Last thing I want to add, I don't know, you talked about how he was a singer and an actor and whatnot. I feel like maybe athletes right now, well, most of them have podcasts, and that's fine. I have one too, but it seems like athletes, I almost want to say, add more talents outside the field. Back in those days, you hear guys like that who did vaudeville. Ty Cobb was a pretty good actor from what we read. I was just going through the press of the 1960s, right after the 1965 World Series. You could hear Jim Mudcat Grant singing at a club in Montreal. He had a 1-week engagement, like 2 weeks, I think, after the World Series where they lost against the Dodgers.
That's right.
So players seem to have, I want to say, more lives outside the field than guys today who maybe just spend so much time training. They go back to training like the day after they were eliminated. Maybe that's just a bias of seeing a couple of examples. I don't know, but it's odd.
Yeah, well, it's a good point. Some of the early ball players who were on vaudeville and other entertainment, they really didn't have much talent. It was really their name was really selling them, and people would come to see them. But Gardella really had talent. And of course later Mudcat Grant, he really did have talent. Denny McLain, also a pitcher for the Tigers, he also had talent as as a musician. I think these days, well, back in the earlier days, this was just one of the options for earning money in the off season, right? When they needed money. Now they don't need money, so they've got a lot of money, so they don't need to do something in the off season. Yeah, thanks for your question.
Yeah, Jackie Robinson played himself in a movie about himself, and yeah, that's
Right.
he was better stay not quitting his day job.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Yeah, there's a horrible movie that Lou Gehrig played in. And it was just because of his name. Yeah.
But most guys worked regular jobs. I remember Joe Altobelli once saying, I worked in the steel mill during the off seasons, and a lot of the guys had missing fingers. But the team didn't realize how dangerous our jobs were outside
Yeah.
of baseball.
Oh, they did all sorts of things. Yeah,
Yeah.
they were police officers and steel workers and everything. Yeah.
I have a question for you, Robert. You said in 1951 at Trois-Rivières that Gardella was hypnotizing his fellow players.
Yes.
What's that all about?
Well, Gardella did some things before his time. And the first one really was the weight training, because as you all probably know, in the early days, weight training was really frowned upon by the major league teams, because the theory was that it would reduce your flexibility. It just didn't work for ball players, and in terms of the skills that they needed to have out on the field. Well, nowadays, of course, everyone is doing weight training. And so Gardella was considered to be a kind of a freak for doing this at the time, but it really kind of paid off. He was a small guy, but he hit these tremendous home runs. And that was part of the reason why he was, successful up to a point. As far as the hypnotizing is concerned, that's another one where he was considered to be a nutcase for suggesting this. But now it's fairly common that if you get into a slump, hypnotism is a possible way of getting out of it. So what he was doing is, the team was doing poorly. And so on the team bus, he was hypnotizing some of his fellow players as they were going to a ball game. And his brother Al didn't really believe in this stuff, and so he got really pissed off that he was actually putting his players to sleep instead of making them perform better. And Al just didn't understand what hypnotism was all about, and so they had a little bit of a rift, but it didn't last. But again, it's just this thing that Gardella seemed to be ahead of his time in these things, where now it's considered to be normal. That's one possible way of getting out of a slump, is to get hypnotized.
Okay.
Yeah, they call it visualization now, but it's basically the same principle.
Exactly. Use a fancy word for it. Yeah.
So because I thought you used a metaphor, but you really did it for real,
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thanks. So more questions? Yeah, Philip?
Yeah, the Farnham team that Drummondville beat in the finals, that was the one that was managed by an African American manager.
I think you're thinking of Sam
Bankhead.
Bankhead,
yes.
Bankhead, yeah.
But I don't think he was the manager that year. I think he didn't become the manager for another year or two. Although there were a number of Negro League players on that team, and more blacks, I think, on that team than on any of the other provincial league teams during the season that Danny was there. I think Bankhead started in 50 or 51. I can't be sure of that, but I think it was a year or two later.
I'm looking at it right now. I'm trying to find you an answer. In 1945, the Farnham Black Sox, the manager was Joe Krakowski.
Oh, it was before.
49.
In 49, yeah.
Oh, 49. Okay.
Yeah, 49, Joe Krakowski.
Krakowskis.
Yeah, Krakowski.
Yeah, a couple of I think Roland Gladu became not only a player, he was among the jumpers, but he became not only a player but also a manager of one of the teams. I forget which one.
I think it was Sherbrooke, was it?
And Stan Brayard was the co-manager of Drummondville. I don't know if it was co-manager, but he and Max Lanier. I think maybe Lanier was managing, and then when Lanier left to go to the Cardinals after the reinstatement, I think maybe Brayard took over then.
Christian says here that in 1949, for Drummondville, Stan Briard was manager, and in Sherbrooke, Ronald Gladu was manager. So
Right, Sherbrooke, yeah.
yeah, exactly. Well, you know the story about Ronald Gladu. He was a jumper also with Jean-Pierre Roy, who played for the Royals. But Gladu went, but Jean-Pierre Roy didn't go. So that's why he wasn't blacklisted.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Well, Ledoux was actually the one jumper which was encouraged to jump. Branch Rickey, he was like career minor leaguer. He was late in his career, and Branch Rickey was like, "Yeah, go over there, make money, and we don't really care." But it wasn't the same thing. Roy went to Mexico. He decided not to sign. He came back after kind of saying, that the major leagues and the high minor leagues that was kind of crap. They were getting exploited, and then he came back and pitifully, like his hat in his hand, meeting with Branch Rickey, who sent him back to Montreal. So their story is different. Stan Briard, he was rumored to leave for Mexico. Finally, got traded to the Pacific Coast League. He played with the San Diego Padres. Of the PCL back in those days. And I think he went to Mexico the year after, if I'm not mistaken.
Maybe.
But basically those were the big three of Quebec players with the Royals in 45, and they all had the temptation to go to Mexico. There's something between Quebec and the hot climates of Mexico. They all wanted to go there at that point.
Yeah, and then they found out it was too hot.
Yeah, well, and the food is not for everybody. The water, it's you like it or you don't. It's not for everyone.
Right.
Exactly.
Danny liked it. There were other jumpers who were complaining, but Danny liked it. He knew Italian, so he was able to pick up Spanish very quickly. And he's just a very social guy. He was out there and just made friends with everyone and just made the best of it. He liked the food, and he didn't, he just had a good experience.
And that's why I probably went to Cuba afterwards to continue the experience in the Latin world.
Exactly. Yeah, had a good experience there too.
Yeah.
Cuba was also fully integrated at that point.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. They were ahead of the game.
Got more questions? No.
His brother Al, I think he played in the majors too, not very long. He never was tempted to jump.
Al actually played on the Giants with Danny for maybe a third of the season. Al was brought up, and so the brothers were together. Al was a first baseman, although actually Danny became a first baseman when he was in Mexico and was quite good at it. But anyway, Al was actually recruited first. He was recruited by the New York Yankees, but then the Yankees sold him immediately to Detroit, and that's how the two of them ended up in the Detroit system when Danny started his minor league career. And Al, that was his only time in the majors. Was a very brief time with the Giants. He had a long minor league career and a very good one. And then he had a long managerial career, also very successful. The exception was the Trois-Rivières experience that I mentioned. He didn't do well there, but almost everywhere else he did really well.
Okay. What was Danny's natural position?
Well, he thought it was outfield, but you could argue that he was a better first baseman. He was really quite good there. And even though, you think of a first baseman these days needing to be fairly tall, and he wasn't, they say that Danny was the first one to actually do a split to catch a ball. And he could do that because he was an acrobat. It was no trouble. I mean, he could catch a ball, standing on his head. So but he was quite good there. He had a lot of mishaps and sort of humorous plays in the outfield when he first came up, and the sports writers exaggerated them and didn't sort of let it go. But he also made sensational catches. I mean, it would be one extreme or the other sometimes, and he had also a very good arm. He had a lot of assists from the outfield, and he was very fast. So he had he had some of the tools to be a good outfielder.
How tall
Can
was he?
you go, can you go back to the front of your book and explain a bit the picture? Because it's
Oh, the cover?
remarkable.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's just he really is balancing on that bat. Uh, Again, he's an acrobat and tremendously strong. That photo was taken in Miami, and Miami is where the Giants were having spring training in 1946. And that was right before he was again kicked off the Giants. What happened was that he came down to join the Giants in Miami for spring training. He missed the train from New York going down, and he argued that he was purposely given the wrong time. But whether he made the mistake or the Giants, it's not clear. But anyway, he got down to Miami, and he still hadn't signed his contract. He got into a conflict with the traveling secretary, and they said, "Well, if you don't sign the contract, you're not a part of the team." And so he was banned from the hotel, the team hotel, and he was banned from spring training initially. But then Mel Ott said, "Well, okay, go out there tomorrow." So he suited up that day, and so you could see him in that photo. He's in a Giants uniform, and he did that stunt. And right after that stunt, he was told that he needed to turn in his uniform and that he was not allowed to be in spring training. So it was his very brief time, his few minutes in spring training for the Giants in Miami, and then that was it. That was the end of his time with the Giants. But yeah, he would do amazing things because he was so incredibly strong and so acrobatic. So it was just one stunt after another. He became famous for it.
Good.
This is part of why I got so interested. I mean, I think he has an important story in terms of his influence on free agency, but he's such a character. All these things that I sort of whisked through about all his talents, each one of them just has dozens of stories, and so he's just such an interesting figure. So that's really what kind of really drew me into him.
And yet he couldn't find a good job after baseball.
Well, no, I think as far as the singing career, although he was very talented, he didn't have resources. He didn't really have a manager, and so it was hard to really sustain it. And then he had all these jobs. He worked as an athletic director. He was back with Al Runes, doing masseuse and training work. He ran a tractor up at a farm in upstate New York. He worked in factories. He worked in a milk factory. He worked for Westinghouse. He had all sorts of blue collar jobs. Ultimately, ended up as a street sweeper in Yonkers, where his family had moved, and he was by that time in his 70s, still trying to make a little bit of money.
Oh boy. Yeah.
And it just seems strange someone so talented would end up a street sweeper.
Sweet. Yeah.
A lot of people didn't know who he was, like, oh, that's
Yeah.
Danny Gardella. Oh, yeah. So now he did some card shows, where celebrity ball players would show up. He was able to get a little mileage out of having been a former, Giant. But as the years went on, people, I think, forgot more and more, who he was. They didn't know.
Any more questions for Robert? No?
really interesting. I had seen your posts about your book, but hearing you talk about it, I'm gonna have to add that to my reading list because it's odd that I just basically grazed by that character studying baseball in the exactly in his time frame without ever stumbling upon him. So I'm gonna have to take a closer look.
Yeah, well, thank you. I think it's also interesting, all the interesting people he encountered. You know, he was playing with these Negro leaguers. He had interactions with Babe Ruth and also with people outside of baseball. So it's you know, it's a broader story to a certain extent than just a baseball story.
Mm.
So thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. And thank you, Robert, also for mentioning his passage in Drummondville. So, yeah, it was a treat for us, to hear about that, because a lot of people know about him because we've heard the name
Yeah,
by Christian and other sources that he played in Drummondville, like with Max Lanier. But, to see it in your PowerPoint and hear you talk about it, it was a treat for us.
yeah. Well, I probably could have given more. It was a very interesting season that he had. So there's more detail about it in the book, and he really did love Canada. He really he didn't really want to leave, but anyway, it was a good experience. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Okay,
thank you. Thank
yeah,
you. And
thank you all for tuning in. I appreciate it.
yeah, before leaving you, I'd like to invite you to Montreal if you ever come to Montreal. Give us a ring, so we can get together.
I'd love to come back, and I will take you up on that. Thank you.
We're in continuous contact through social media. So give me an email or something or a message or whatever. So if you ever come back to Montreal, only maybe for vacation or something, give us a call.
I will. I certainly will. Thanks a
But
lot.
thank you, Robert. Thank you for everything. It was very interesting. So I will leave you on that, okay?
Okay. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you. Merci tout le monde. Thank you for being there.
Merci. Bye.
Salut. Bon. Est-ce qu'on a encore le...
Oui, mais je vais cesser l'enregistrement.
Ouais, OK.
Mais je t'ai envoyé un lien tout à l'heure.
Tu m'as envoyé un lien?
Ouais, dans ton courriel.
Laisse-moi voir ça. Je vais...
Et puis, c'est mon Zoom à moi.
OK. Laisse-moi voir.
T'en souviens-tu,
Oui,
Philippe?
parfait, je l'ai.
Attends,
OK, je
Philippe,
vais...
quand on
Quoi?
quitte le meeting, est-ce que l'enregistrement cesse? T'en souviens-tu?
Je crois qu'il va cesser quand tu arrêtes le meeting.
OK, c'est ça,
Donc,
parce que je
on
voulais.
va quitter tous les deux, puis je te rejoins sur l'autre.
OK, parce que moi, d'habitude, quand je travaille, là, quand je fais mes formations, je l'arrête manuellement, mais là, je ne sais pas, je ne veux pas non plus briser le truc. Fait que, on va quitter le
Ouais, je
meeting.
crois que c'est eux qui contrôlent, que c'est
Ouais, c'est
enregistré
ça.
automatiquement.
Fait que je t'envoie le lien, puis je me connecte ailleurs.
OK.